Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your pauper commentators, Michael Pedrick and Adrian Garzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
Well, good.
All right. I can appreciate that. It's finally good weather up here. You know, we got a little bit of thunderstorms tonight, but
Here
that's about it.
Sunny Boston, Massachusetts.
That's literally 99% of the time a lie. So I'm not going to play our patrons like that or the rest of the listeners as a whole. All right. So let's take care of upkeep because this is actually a guest episode and we will get to who we have on this as soon as we have finished all the upkeep stuff. So I will keep it short and sweet this time. Yeah, this is the point where you can skip ahead if you really can't wait. So this show, as always, is brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. They're a really, really great website. They have all sorts of dice bags, playmats, art prints, and tokens with art from magic artists, as well as all over the world and history, the rest of art, really. And right now, they just got in the public orders for the Relics of Wizardry series. It's a bunch of metal tokens that you can actually use, and they are really, really neat little things. Josh sent us some a while back, and they're really solid. And I don't know. I think it's a really cool product, and they also have a bunch of cool stuff they just got in. Like there's a map of Dominaria, there's a map of Ixalan as like playmats. It's really, really cool. And personally, I am a huge fan of this recurring nightmare playmat that they have, and didn't know about it until like not even 4 minutes, like a couple minutes before the show. So they've got some really cool stuff. We are an affiliate. If you are going to go buy something there, I highly recommend that you use the affiliate code Commontary, spells it is in the name of the show and in all caps, and that will get you 5% off. We'll get a little bit of a kickback, so you're getting a deal, and you're also helping support the show, keep the lights on both here and in Austin. Once again, that is Commontary, spelled as it is in the name of the show, all caps. Adrian, what do you have for us?
Well, Mike, I don't know if you know this, but we have a Patreon for just $1 an episode. You too can be a part of that. You can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, and you'll also get access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel. Now, I do have a small tragedy to tell you. By the time you listen to this, unless I guess you're already a patron, our contest will be over. We were having a patron drive this month. If we got up to $100 an episode, we are going to raffle away a free playmat. We're currently at $95 as of date of recording, but like I said, you're going to be listening to this on Sunday, so it'll be over by then. But yeah, we'd still love to have you. So, Mike, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Well, so we figured it's the week after SCG Con. Big pauper event just happened. We talked about big pauper events last week on the show. Who better on earth to have than the one, the only, the Maverick girl, Kendra? Say hi to the people,
Kendra. Hey there.
All right, so Kendra, for people who don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself, your content, that sort of stuff.
Plug yourself. This is the time.
So, I am a, I guess, part-time streamer, grinder, Magic Online. Stream on Twitch, http whatever, twitch.tv / the Maverick girl, and also on obviously Twitter at the Maverick gal, because somebody had already taken the Maverick girl. And just happened, I play a lot of pauper on Twitch, on Magic Online. I've been lately trying to do some other formats. I've recently joined the Card Hoarder Network, and so I've just been trying to do a bunch of different things.
Yeah, and I think you also write for Hipsters of the Coast as well, right?
Thank you for reminding me of that.
you got too many things going on at once. You can't keep them all straight. But
it's getting to that point.
Yeah, I mean it's been great. Like I remember the first time I ran into your stream to now, and like seeing it go from a small stream to like a larger stream, articles, affiliate with Card Hoarder, all that stuff. It's really awesome.
Kind of crazy if you ask me, honestly.
That's actually what I was just about to say. So Mike and I definitely share that sentiment. So we'll definitely put some links to your stuff in the episode. Listeners, absolutely check it out. She is probably one of the best pauper players currently streaming, and certainly an expert on her deck, which is elves.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, what was like I obviously, I'm fully expecting there to be some level of tournament report, but the SCG Con Pauper Classic, what was that experience like as a whole? Because I've played in some mid-sized Pauper events, but never something that's like that large or with that sort of public.
There were 125 people playing. Correct.
Yeah, there were a bunch of
Yeah,
people.
there were 125 players, from what I understand. That's based on. I mean, you can look at the standings report, but but it's harder to track what was the first table, what was the last table. Looking at those, but when we had the initial seedings up, where we're turning a deck list and just sitting down for the player meeting, you basically took the last table, subtracted off the first table. You multiply that by 2 because obviously there's 2 players per table, and then you just shave off the last one extra person because there's only one person at that last table. And when I put that in my phone calculator, it was telling me it was 125 players, which, to my understanding, from what they told me at the registration booth, and this was at 109 players, mind you, when they told me the initial number, it was more players than the Legacy Classic and the Standard Classic. And it was, according to the professor, and from what I understand, the guys at SCG, was just like 3 or 4 players short of beating the Modern Classic in numbers.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Yeah, I know. It was definitely something else. It was crazy. So obviously I've played in some bigger events before. Obviously, 2 months ago, I attended GP Seattle and played in the main standard event, which had almost somewhere between like 1,500 players, to my understanding. And so, I mean, playing big events is something I'm unfamiliar with. In fact, if anything, it's been great being able to actually play them again, where I haven't been able to play them very much in these last couple of years. And seeing something with Pauper, even though it's still, obviously has room to grow, it's not 1,500 players GP size just yet. It's really nice seeing, there's 125 players showing up to this major event. And there probably would have been even more if they were able to attend it.
Yeah, it was really, really surprising to see that sort of turnout for this format. And I get that people were there for other reasons, but I've got to imagine, like, because do we actually get numbers on how many people enter the challenges? Because I think those don't even cap out in the 3 digits.
We do. Kendra probably knows better than I, but I believe that the pauper challenges are typically like 70 people, if even.
If we're talking about the online ones, it depends. It varies from week to week. Some weeks you have closer towards actually 60. Some weeks you have closer to like 110. I mean, I'd say it does average somewhere between like 70, 80. But, there's like occasional periods where those numbers will go up a little bit, and there's periods where they'll go down a little bit. I imagine the numbers were probably down a little bit this week because of the Classic. Again, there were a couple grinders who would probably normally play the event who weren't there who weren't able to because they were at SCG Con for the Classic.
Right. And something other sort of interesting to note, by the time this episode comes out, we should have already had the Channel Fireball tournament as well. So it's going to be very interesting to look over those numbers too.
Yeah, because that's on Saturday, correct?
Correct. Which, as of day of recording, is 4 days away, 3 days away, 4 days away, 3 days.
3
days.
3.
1, 2, 5.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really curious about, I know Mike said something about a tournament report. I'm sure the listeners are as well. I'm very curious about how the tournament actually went. Do you mind giving us an overview? Maybe something you played, some memories that might stick out?
It definitely was just a very, solid tournament all around. There were a lot of players, didn't really have too many judge calls, had a few interesting moments, a few newer players. My second matchup was against a player running mono black zombies. I seemed very new to the game as a whole. I had to actually sit down and explain to him how regeneration works, because he was trying to regenerate, I think, Ghoul Razor, the one that randomly gets a zombie out of your yard back to your hand.
That's Ghoul Razor.
And he thought, since it, he did the old, well, the creature died and I'm regenerating it, so now it's dead and it's in the graveyard and it's coming back, so I get this trigger. And I had to sit there and explain to him, no, you don't. This is why. You call a judge if you want to. But otherwise, I'm just going to sit here and explain to you how regeneration actually works. You can call a judge to verify that. He chose not to, but I always encourage anybody, if you have any questions, concerns about an issue, something that you're not familiar with or understanding, always call a judge.
Yeah, so as far as, like, obviously you showed up with elves. It's your signature deck. It's the one that you have put in countless hours with. Did you actually make any alterations to your list for this event?
I didn't. I just went with my list that I've been running online for leagues, because that's made, obviously, if anybody is pay attention to any of my lists or anything online, I do tend to make like small tweaks when I'm going to challenges, because challenges have more of a structured metagame. You can kind of predict based on what the last week was, what you're going to see. And you do notice that the challenges shift a lot in what you'll end up seeing from week to week. And you see that a bit in leagues, but not quite to the same degree. So when you're in leagues, you're kind of facing a bit more of a blind meta, and that's kind of what the deck that I had tuned for that kind of more blind meta is what I just ended up brought to the event. But I'm not gonna lie, because they have because obviously Star City runs pauper challenges themselves. Now, unlike the ones run online, they're not massive tournaments. But they are, standard, like 4-round events, kind of closer to what, Channel Fireball does with their side events for pauper. And so I started peeking around at those events a little bit between some of my events on Friday. Saturday, I was completely out of commission, unfortunately, and wasn't able to attend the venue at all. But, and I kept looking around, and maybe it was just a fact of certain matches had finished before everything had happened, but I was like, there is a lot of like Dimir and mono black control at this table, and I was getting really scared actually about bringing elves, because obviously black can really run over elves with its removal suite. Not always. I think I have a better chance against Dimir control. It's a bit closer, probably, I guess, like a maybe like 40-60 matchup for elves, maybe a little bit better than that, so it's a little more fair, but obviously gets much harder post sideboard. And but mono black control is just slam dunk done. It's really hard to deal with. So I actually was getting really nervous, and I at one point slightly considered the possibility of switching over to something like Boros, but I was like, elves is kind of my deck, and I'm going for this, big major event for the first time, as, somewhat of, I guess a face of the format, for certain, certain people, certain crowds. And, so I was like, I've got to represent that deck. I've got, just jump in like that. And that's what I did.
It's your brand, for better or worse. Like that's what people know you for.
Exactly.
And I do want to echo, you seem a little hesitant. I do consider you to be a face of the format, so no shame there. So yeah, you definitely wanted to rep, and it's awesome that you won for that very reason.
Yeah. And it was really funny for me particularly, because I wanted to do well and everything at the event, but what I ended up doing was I ended up starting the event losing 0-2 to Boros. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly where I expect to start. It's like, it's going to be like, I don't know, like 0-2 drop or something like that. And just happened, it went from 0-2 against Boros to, I believe, regular listener, I would imagine, David Lee, aka Thraben Valiant. He was repping a color commentary playmat
Thanks.
for you guys. So I'm sure he'll hear us and listen to it too. But I mean, my first game against him was my opening hand was straight no landers all the way down. No landers all the way until I hit 4 cards, and it was still no lands. And I just decided to keep it because it was better to try for it than to go to 3. And then just lost to the sideboard cards after that. So, but then after that, it was just 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0. So, and it was definitely very surprising. It was a very interesting experience. Not only was there a pretty good, diverse, healthy meta, you know, it was definitely very open. You maybe if you poke around in certain areas, you see talk on Reddit, on some, you know, there's a Facebook group. And you hear people talking about it to say, oh, there was a lot of Delver. Oh, there's a lot of this. Well, it was like when I sat down at my first match, I looked to my one side. I saw some Delver. I saw some black. I looked to my other side, and I see a lot of green. And I even see some, brews going on. I started poking around after my match ended. I saw this crazy Wall of Glare deck, I think it is. Wall of Glare, and it was like it's like a wall that can block any number of creatures each combat, and you basically give it like I think it was Ghostly Possession, so it deals no damage, but it also takes no damage, so it can block every creature forever.
Okay.
I see that deck on Reddit recently. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the professor was mentioning that too. Shout out to him. Tulare Community College ended up seeing him. In fact, he was actually my round 5 opponent, so that was really cool.
What was he on?
He was on Affinity.
Yeah. Sweet. Sorry, Mike, I cut you off. What were you saying?
Oh, no, I was going to say that I think I saw him tweet out a photo of you when he sat down across from you.
Oh, yeah, he was like, we need to take pictures of each other and tag each other.
That's awesome.
So, it was definitely a good time there. But, I mean, I saw that in my round 4 opponent, I believe, was on Methonical's enchantment control deck. It was really interesting to see. And obviously, my first opponent in the top 8 was a Tortured Existence deck. Like, who would have thought that was going to show up in the top 8?
See, actually,
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. What were you going to say?
I want Kendra to tell us a little bit more about the top 8. Like, I want to know how you felt during your matches. Just tell me a little bit more about the top 8 experience. Like, we've talked a little bit about the Swiss, but I'm sure even making top 8 was a thrill unto itself. But then you got to steel yourself and think, well, I'm not leaving unless I'm first.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience for me. I'd never really been at top 8. Obviously I had top 8 at different events before. I've performed well in different events before. I've top 8 on the challenges. I even won one back in October, as well as my first day at GP Seattle was an 8-0. My best ever finish up until this event in particular, I guess, was one of the Star City Opens like years ago. I think I got like 19th or 21st place. I always forget which one, out of like a good like 450 people, I want to say, for a standard event. And so it was definitely, but it's always a thrill, it's always something. When you kind of reach that level. And so it was definitely, really crazy. We ended up taking our decks to the judges to have them get deck checked before we sat down to play. And then they set up our decks in the order based on the seeding. Obviously, I think I had the time when we started, I was 3rd or 4th place in the standings. So, I had the option to play, and just happened to be placed up against the Tortured Existence player. And I'm not gonna lie, that made me feel pretty decent about myself there. Not that Tortured Existence is a bad deck or anything.
You're so fast.
But yeah, especially when it's got a bit of a rep, but I think it's just that it's trickier to play online than it is in paper, and we just obviously haven't had much chance to see it unfold in paper. So but I've with elves, I feel like I can usually navigate it pretty well. Obviously, it can kind of explode a little bit faster than Tortured Existence can deal with what I'm putting out. The only real thing that was cause for concern is Crypt Rats. And it definitely came up. But at some point, we also got to the point of utilizing, the Crypt Rats, like knowing that, like, hey, Crypt Rats is coming. What's the maximum, like, I can do, like, to make them take as much damage as possible? And that came up in the enchantment control game as well. Like, I know I'm staring down a pestilence and I'm going to die. How can I make that damage work to my advantage? That they're going to take from the pestilence and make that work to my advantage. And that's basically what kind of got me there. Game 2 against Tortured Existence, I was really kind of nervous because they had actually locked me out at one point. They had a Brown Scale loop going on with Tortured Existence, and also had Crypt Rats in the yard, which they could get back however much they wanted. And I hit a timely Gleeful Sabotage and was able to stabilize myself before they could get anything going. So that helped there. But then once we got done with our match, I started looking at, because we were the first ones done, I started looking at the rest of the field. And I saw 3 Blue-Red Delver, Boros, Dimir Control, and Mono Black Control. And I went, oh man, oh no, this is rough. Because a lot of those could be tricky matchups. Boros isn't the worst matchup, but it was on the entire opposite side of the table, so it was on the entire opposite side of the bracket. Meaning, if they would have to get to the finals, and I would have to get to the finals if I were to face them. Obviously, the pilot, Zane, I don't know his last name off the top of my head, but he's a streamer himself, actually. Z Magic. I can't remember the thing. I'm trying to look it up now. I'll find it later. I'll give you guys like a link or something. But it was a Z Magic, something or other. And he did not make it. But I felt like, hey, if I could at least end up facing that, maybe it would actually be really cool, because that's kind of like the deck I feel like I have the best matchup against out of what I saw in that top 8. But except maybe Torture Existence. But I didn't want to face Mono Black. I really didn't want to face Dimir Control, even though I feel like I could beat Dimir Control. It's some of the most unfun Magic for me personally. When I just get a string of Dimir Control online, I do end up getting kind of tilted. I know people who watch my streams may not really see me get tilted that often, but it's definitely happened. And I know like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, something like that, it happened where I just played leagues constantly for like a day or two and just faced like one after another, like tough matchup. And even though I was still on like a positive record, like 3-2, 3-2, 3-2, it just, the even winning just felt rough. It didn't feel good. So I was not looking forward to that. I wasn't looking forward to Blue Red Delver. I wasn't looking forward to any of it. And so, but then the players finished up. And none of the other players on the other side of the bracket were finished, but the other match in the quarterfinals finished up in my bracket. So the judge just let us go right to it since we weren't on a time bracket or anything. We weren't on camera, nothing else. Which does annoy me, speaking of that, we weren't on camera, because by the time our top 8 kind of started, their feature match area was not in use at all. So they could, I'm sure there's certain logistical reasons why, but it would have been really cool if to have them, cover that top 8 of Pauper.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
Yeah, it really would have been. So I ended up just facing off against my blue-red Delver opponent and just took the play and just swarmed the board too quick for them to deal with. And then Postboard, I ended up basically doing the same thing. We had the initial trade back and forth a little bit. They were using bolts and counters here and there, but then they kind of quickly ran out of gas, which, even though blue-red Delver is known for its relative consistency, that can happen. So that is what ended up happening in that regard, and they just ended up scooping it up. They thought they had a blocker, but I guess, and this is maybe where, again, my knowledge of the format kind of came into play a little bit, they somehow missed the fact that I had 2 Kieran Rangers on the board with a Timberwatch Elf. So I was able to activate the Timberwatch Elf multiple times, and they didn't see that interaction. And then I just kind of hung around, waited until the other matches were finished, and set across my opponent. And I know this is going to be disappointing to some people, but there was no actual magic in the finals. My opponent wanted to split. He just wanted to get out of there. And was offering like, hey, I could take the, offering me the prize tickets for the because he wanted the open points a little bit more, I think. It sounded like probably a bit more of like a serious, a grinder for like the Star City circuit.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of wanted that a little bit more, but I was like, if I felt a little bit more confident, I would have been on the play. And I think Elves is better against Delver decks when it's on the play. That includes blue-red Delver and mono-blue Delver. In fact, to the point that I think, and other players might agree or disagree, I guess, but mono-blue Delver, I feel like people will always say like, how do you as the mono-blue player beat Elves and stomping and all that? Well, it's just you kind of get steamrolled a lot of the time. But if the Delver player is on the play, it can definitely be a bit of a game changer. They can get the advantage ahead of time and put the Elves player in a bad position. And obviously that goes more so for blue-red Delver, since they can kind of get that start up before the Elves player gets going. So if I'm able to get going a little bit before they can, it definitely gives me a head start. So I would have felt kind of confident. And the other thing is, I wanted to, because for him to take the open points, I would have basically had to take second place. I'm like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of extra prize wall points here, and that's definitely some real like monetary value. Maybe, I don't know, $100 or so for Star City. Probably actually more than that if I had to guess. But I was there to play Pauper, and I was there to like play, and rep this awesome community that's been really pushing this format and wanting it to grow. And I'm like, I'd rather play for it, try and play. And then he just said, I'll just give it to you. Did it and was on his way. So that's the story of how that all happened. There was no actual magic, but it was just still definitely an experience, because obviously, splitting at, a higher level event isn't something that, normally gets seen a lot. A lot of times, especially if it's like something that's on camera, you don't usually see a split. You see them play it out.
Yeah, and I mean, there's people out there who definitely be disappointed. There's definitely that contingent that doesn't like the intentional draw anywhere in high level Magic, but I don't know. You got to take home the plaque. You've got that official, SCG pauper
And
champion
as the
thing.
2017
So
Pauperpalooza champion, I think it suits you very well. I'm glad that you are the one who was the champion. Very much so. Like I said, as a face of the community, I think it means a lot to us. It means a lot to all of us that one of our own took down the tournament.
Yeah, definitely. And I saw a lot of that sentiment afterwards, even though I couldn't really respond very much. I went back to my hotel and then went out to do some stuff. And as soon as I got back from the hotel, oh, hey, I need to pack. I need to get ready because I need to check out first thing in the morning and make a 12-hour drive. And I'm still dealing with, even though I'm better, I was still recovering from, food poisoning. So, or what seemed like food poisoning anyway. And so I was just feeling rough. I couldn't really, there were like so many messages between Twitter and Reddit and Facebook. It's like I could only answer so much, so I didn't even get around to answering some of the questions, some of the comments until last night after I got home from work. And but it was definitely awesome. Just kind of I saw a lot of that outpouring, and I don't think if you just had just another grinder that maybe people don't know as well, you maybe wouldn't have seen that same degree of sentiment from the community.
Right. Which, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely nice that so a known face within the community got there, and I do think that it sort of helps. I don't know. It helps the public face of the format. So I'm really glad. So with this experience under your belt, do you still think that Elves is a great choice for these larger events, given that you did allude to the fact that like a majority of the top 8 were not favorable matchups for you in your mind? Do you still think that it's a good call if someone is comfortable enough with the deck?
I mean, I can definitely see it. I mean, obviously, if you actually look at the top 16, there was an Elves player, I believe, in 9th place. So they just missed the top 8. But I definitely saw a lot of other decks out there. It was a really diverse meta, and there were definitely some other decks that you weren't seeing as much. For example, where was all the Tron? That was one thing I saw a lot of people mentioning on like Reddit and everything. Like, where was the Tron? And I saw a little bit of it, but not that much. Like I said, it was a lot of, I definitely saw a lot of like, kind of black decks. I saw Stompy. People were saying they saw a lot of Delver, but I didn't, at least at my tables, I didn't see a lot of it. I saw a lot of Brews. I saw a lot of other things. Didn't really see any Burn, a little bit, but not much.
I think this might also go back to the article you wrote where people are going to play what they have. And the Tron deck, you might not have some of those cards lying around. Mike and I also talked in our show about how Tron seems particularly well positioned against specifically the Moto metagame, but might not do so well in an open tournament.
That's fair. I could see that. And yeah, having what you have is definitely a thing that I feel like was definitely going to be a factor for some people. And I do think that's part of the reasons maybe we didn't see so much. And this is the other point that I was getting to. There really wasn't anything in the way of, say, is it Blitz or Tireless Tribe? You had a few people running it. In particular, Green Prinny himself was there, rocking the deck. I think there was like maybe one or two other people. I didn't see any blitz players at all that I could see. Maybe there was one that just I never ended up seeing, but I didn't see any at all around me. And those are definitely contenders for decks. I didn't really see very much by way of Boggles, Hexproof. I don't think I really saw any heroic. So we didn't see any of like these go tall decks. Some of them, especially Boggles, tend to prey on decks like Blue Red Delver. So I think there's certain factors that could have maybe shifted the meta a little bit. And again, it's just very open meta. I think Elves is fine for like an open meta if you can know how to handle it and everything. And I think there's a few things, obviously, if I had known the meta a little bit better, which obviously I couldn't. It was a blind meta. But the one thing I might have done instead is changed out like one of my moments pieces out of my list. Because obviously those are more geared towards like decks like Inside Out and Is It Blitz. And since I'm not seeing those decks, I probably don't need the moments piece nearly as much, and probably could have focused more on like maybe added like another Spider Silk Armor to the sideboard or something.
Yeah, so I think the one of those that like kind of, for lack of a better way, boggles me the most is the lack of representation of Hexproof, because that is a deck that's not monetarily super expensive, but has always been a solid performer in recent years. It's never been, top of the metagame or anything, but not seeing any boggles or hardly any boggles is a little strange to me, because that seems like the type of deck that is, it not only has an analog within modern boggles, but also seems like one that I see a lot of players picking up when they're first getting into the format and really kind of falling in love with. So I don't know, that's kind of weird to me that would be one of the missing pieces.
Yeah, definitely. And again, that and heroic. Obviously, like I said before, if you played during Theros block standard, you pretty much have mono white heroic. A few cards aside, but those cards should be like pretty much actual pennies just to pick up.
Yeah, there's like a handful of weird cards in it, but by and large, like that's not going to be a difficult deck to toss together. I don't know. Like I also get the Tron thing, having played at one of the a couple of the Channel Fireball events. Tron is really, really difficult to actually like tech out a list to encompass who knows what. Like, you're going to get 3 rounds of random opponents, some of whom have never really played the format before. So I do think that one makes sense, but the rest of those not being as present is a little strange to me. Like,
there was definitely some interesting ones. I did end up actually facing a Tron opponent in my, I believe, 3rd round. And he was on the Stonehorn Tron list. And there was definitely some interesting lines being taken, and I could tell, maybe he may have played it a little bit in the past. I mean, I personally, I would not take Tron to like a major event like that without kind of knowing what I was doing a little bit. I don't even feel comfortable streaming it online anymore. I feel like I can pilot the deck decently online, but when I'm on stream, everybody has their own opinion about what line should be taken, because there are so many lines. It makes you second guess yourself, and then you time out like every match. And there was, some of the typical plays, the teachings for teachings. So that way you have an extra teachings to back you up in, later turns. My opponent was casting mystical teachings, but not going for that second mystical teachings. Instead, it was going for, the value cards just right out of the gate. So it was definitely, telling to me that maybe these players also just don't have the best grasp of that deck to pilot it to the top 8 of a major event, compared to certain people in the online scene who have piloted it who have we seen recently? Helsau and Jay Siri.
Yep. He's had his results.
So
but yeah, it's definitely interesting to see those specific changes, because the Tron one we actually discussed on our show about large events, but seeing things like Inside Out missing is really strange when that's become a very present force within the metagame online.
Yeah, but if you think about it, just kind of makes sense. Like, first off, like, how often do you see Tireless Tribe, in a store, like in people's collections? It's when I remember the first time I saw it in Pauper online, like before it actually became like a real meta deck and like a real tiered deck. I had to look at the card and went, what on earth is this? Wait, well, what does this do again? People don't realize that they have this stuff. Then they need, and on top of that, first they need the Tireless Tribe, which is an Odyssey card, a weird random Odyssey card. And then on top of that, they need another, bit more popular, but lesser used apart from this deck. And they needed in the form of Circular Logic. And then on top of that, they still needed, go back a little bit further. Oh, they needed Shadow Rift from Tempest, another odd card that doesn't really see play anywhere else. And Inside Out, going more forward from Shadowmoor, Eventide. So it's one of them. I can't remember which one off the top of my head ever.
Oh no! It must be Eventide, because it's got the little sun thing.
Yeah, that's Eventide then. That's right, because I think Shadowmoor is ally colors and Eventide is enemy. But it was just, it's not, and then you also have Gush as well. So you have just like a weird mix of cards that people just don't have just lying around in collections. You need to actually go out and buy those cards. And like I was mentioning in my article, yes, anybody can go to TCG Player and just buy these cards. But not everybody does that. There's a lot of people that want to play and they just decide, hey, I'm just going to go to my store and do it. But obviously for me, Cool Stuff Inc. is 5 minutes away from me. And I remember I went to them to try and find Battle Screech, because I needed a Battle Screech to finish out Boros so I could try and play in the side event challenges. I didn't actually end up playing any of them for unfortunate because of unfortunate circumstances. But I could not find Battle Screech there at all. And then I went to Star City to check with them for because hey, it's just easy. I can just pick it up at the con. They didn't have any copies in stock short of foils, and I didn't want a foil. And then I tried going to, some of the other shops in the area, and none of them had Battle Screeches either. So short of, going to TCG Player, I just couldn't find it. And I'm sure you definitely probably have players who want to play these events who have similar experiences.
Yeah, I think that all tracks. Yeah, because I've definitely gone commons hunting in bulk bins at stores and found nothing. At this point, I'm pretty much complete on my Pauper collection, but for folks who play mostly online or haven't really played the format at all, I can definitely see that being a sticking point, especially since parts of Inside Out now are fairly expensive. I think Gush is $4 or $5.
I think it's more than
so
that.
Is Circular Logic.
Circular Logic. I think they're both $5 or $6 at least now.
They've definitely gone up for the demand for the Tribe deck. As we sort of enter the back half of the show here, there are a couple things I definitely want to hit before we end for the evening. The first is, Kendra, I'm very curious about your opinion of land grant. You knew it was coming.
Land grants.
What? Okay, I know your
my old nemesis.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Do not play land grants in elves.
Will you explain
if
why?
you're playing one land spy in pauper or belcher in legacy, I will give you the pass. But in in elves, no. So I understand why people think it's good. I when you look at the rationale, I can understand it. The idea of like, hey, you don't have to run so many lands, so like, hey, you don't just end up drawing into, I don't know, 6 or 7 lands in a row. I know, because I know I talk to you guys on the side sometimes. How often have you heard me just kind of like get a little salty and rage a little bit because I just drew 8 lands in my top, like, I don't know, 11 cards.
It happens.
It definitely happens. And so people were like, well, by doing this, it takes your lands out of your deck and gives you like more access to like your, core deck a little bit, as it were. And it also gives you untaps for Nettle Sentinel, and which can be relevant for, activated Birchlord Rangers or what's the other one? Viridian Longbow. And it also shuffles your deck after casting Lead the Stampede. Like, let's say you're on more. Let's ignore the Distant Melody version where you can just draw on other things and shuffle with Sylvan Ranger. Okay, let's ignore that and go to the mono green version, which doesn't have that draw capability quite so much. Doesn't really have any shuffle access apart from Land Grant in that regard. And you need to hit your sideboard cards, which typically, even in that mono green version, which has a harder time drawing them, you cast Lead the Stampede and see, I don't know, your 2 Spider Silk Armors that you need to prevent Neela Trickery blow out, and you stick them to the bottom. So people would say, well, that gives you the opportunity to shuffle, and that's fair. But here's the thing. First off, it's been proven time and time again that deck thinning really doesn't give you that much advantage. You're talking percentage of a percentage point, basically. Maybe in greater numbers, sure, if you manage to cast like all of them in one game. But even then, you're still looking at just minute, percentage potential advantages. But you're also opening yourself up to other risks. Obviously, one that people talk about a lot is getting blown out by days. Having your only land grant, or having your only land drop, rather, get countered by days, always will feel bad. Always.
I have days of land grant, and it felt great.
So I will say that days does not come up a lot in the format these days. It does show up, but not nearly as much as it used to. So I will say that that's less of a factor, but at the same time, why open yourself to unnecessary risk? But that also, speaking of that unnecessary risk factor, that leads me into my next and biggest point of giving your opponent open information to your hand is bad. It's really bad. And I've heard people tell me, well, why does it matter? You're just spitting out your hand anyway, so they're going to see what you're going to play anyway. And that's fair. But it doesn't, that's the ideal way to play. It doesn't always happen like that, and people don't always realize that. There's definitely been games where I'm just, here's a mana dork and another mana dork, and then I'm trying to grind out into playing a Lissalana Huntmaster and then start to go off a little bit, but it takes like 5 or 6 turns for me to get to that point. And you see that with like other things too. And the other one I hear a lot, is like removal. and counter magic. And my point is that they'll always know exactly what to counter and what to remove. And I had just actually, someone approached that angle and, came to me and said, well, shouldn't a good player know what to counter and what to remove? They should know that, like, hey, the Priest of Titania, the Timberwatch Elf, Well-Wisher, and Lissalon Huntmaster, those are like the dangerous cards. Those, maybe Birchlore Rangers, depending on the point in the game, and the rest of the board state. And that's a valid point. But there's two things to that, and this is what I said to that person. First off, there's my always my favorite example. I bring this up all the time. I tell it to people whenever this comes up. I think it represents the situation quite well. My first ever paper pauper event, I ended up playing up against a mono blue Delver player in my first matchup. And things were looking pretty grim. I don't know, probably game 2. And I was definitely on the back pedal a little bit. And they had, I think I was like at 6 life. They had 2 creatures on the board. And they had 2 blue mana open. And I had 2 cards, and maybe more cards, but I was focusing on these 2. I had Timberwatch Elf and Distant Melody. So what I did is I cast Timberwatch Elf to bait my opponent. Because, that's a real threat. If they don't take care of it, they could actually die. And so my opponent made correct threat assessment and countered it. Well, then what ended up happening is I ended up going and casting Distant Melody, which drew me a whole bunch of cards, including another Distant Melody, which I played all of those cards and then, activated Priest Titania again or whatever I did, and went off again with my other Distant Melody. And I basically drew my entire deck and won the game on the spot. And if I had ended up using a land grant in that mix, then they probably would have known that I had both Timberwatch Elf and Distant Melody. Probably would have taken their chances with the Timberwatch, because really I couldn't have won on the spot with the Timberwatch. It just would have put them in a risky, dangerous position, which is why they countered it. And then they would have saved their counter magic for that Distant Melody instead. So even when your opponent is good and does have good threat assessment, it tells them things that are happening otherwise, and lets them. And it doesn't give you the opportunity to play those sorts of mind games where you can, bait someone or try and get someone to do something, because they'll just know what you're going to do. They'll basically be able to think the way you're thinking as you're playing. And the other thing too is what I also said, and I don't always like to say it like this because I feel like I may be putting down other players. But if you're going for maximum spike value, which, for those who might not know, spike is being, super competitive with Magic. And if you're going for that maximum spiky kind of value for like an event like this, and you're up against someone who maybe doesn't know quite so well, why open yourself up to giving them that knowledge? Even if they don't know what to, counter, why tell them counter this, kill this?
Yeah, it's one of those things that has always baffled me as an argument, because I understand deck thinning. I understand mathematics. Like I've had a good track record with that as a subject, but Magic has a handful of things that are hidden information, and there is a strategic advantage in that, and removing that advantage for, as you said, a percentage of difference just always rubbed me the wrong way. Like, sure, like the Days blowout exists, but every time I've had land grant played against me out of elves, my games have gone much better than they would have, because it's like, oh, okay, you have chosen to keep a one lander with only one cost mana dork. If I can remove that, you're going to have a bad time. Let's do this. And it represents a large loss of strategic advantage, if not necessarily like in-game advantage.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess from your viewpoint, like, you have your decks that you really love. I just kind of want to get a feel for your interpretation of the current online metagame, and do you think it's healthy? Which I know is a doozy of a question, but I just, with what we've seen in the challenges and the restriction of the data for Magic Online, I think you probably grind as much as almost anyone else out there. Do you think we're currently in a good place with Pauper?
I have mixed feelings on this. For me personally, I'm not enjoying it as much as I was, was maybe a couple months ago or something. But at the same time, I think obviously you always enjoy a format a bit better sometimes. There's obviously a certain reward in, those very skill intensive matches, and they definitely happen, and they always feel so good when they're done, win or lose. Just because they're just back and forth, very skill intensive, and you can feel that skill intensity. But you obviously feel better. You kind of enjoy the meta a little bit. You enjoy the game a little bit more, obviously, when you're winning. And and I don't know. I've been struggling a little bit. There's definitely been a bit of a rise in like pestilence decks and things like that, which in part counter the Delver lists. But my feelings still slightly stand true with regards to the format health, and that's the fact of, I think the format is doing a little bit better, at least maybe in the leagues and everything. If we had more structured tournaments to go off of, I think the data might show a little differently. Obviously, we've seen Alex Ullman compiling his data, and a lot of the challenge data from those bigger events online was showing like Delver or Blue-Red Delver was just better than just about every other deck by like a considerable margin, just in the sheer numbers it was putting up. That may be due to things like deck popularity and things like that. And again, that's where having more actual tournaments would be a great indicator. But obviously, we saw that reflected somewhat in this past weekend's Classic event, where 3 of the top 4 were Blue-Red Delver players. So I think there is something to be said in that regard. Obviously, I play more of the leagues on Magic Online. So when I see those, I see these decks coming and going. And I think that's what people don't realize. I remember back in November, obviously as, a major Elves player, someone who plays the deck all the time, when Lead the Stampede first came out, everybody was looking at, Lead the Stampede and Seeker of the Way as like the 2 premier cards that could break out from Iconic Masters. And people were brewing, but nobody had anything definitive with Seeker of the Way. And it still kind of hasn't properly found a home. It's like, it shows up in decks, it shows up in Heroic sometimes, it shows up in Boros from time to time, but it still hasn't really found, I guess, like a true home where it's always going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody looked at Lead the Stampede and went, this goes in Elves. This goes in Elves. It maybe goes in like Slivers and some other things, but it goes in Elves. So what was the first reaction? Everybody was playing Elves. And because everybody was playing Elves, that stifled other numbers a little bit. So all people were seeing was Elves, Elves, Elves. And it reached tier 1 for a period of time it reached the top deck on MTG Goldfish, which, as we all know, it's not always the best metric to go off of, especially since, the recent data restrictions have taken effect. But at the time, everybody was crying, something needs to go from elves. Something needs to go from elves. And obviously we've seen the meta respond to that. We've seen shifts happen. We've seen things come and go. And elves, while it's still a strong contender in the format, and much more so since Lead the Stampede, it's not the top deck anymore. It's not the deck that everyone is playing. Everybody's kind of moved on. A lot of players have moved on. They're doing other things now. And you see this a lot with other things. I remember when blue-black Flicker was big last year. And it was all over the meta for that little brief, month period of time. And everybody was like, something needs to go from this deck. But it went as quickly as it came. And I think that's kind of reflective of the pauper meta, that it's very ebb and flow. You see decks kind of come and go. Now, like I said, though, Delver is definitely showing up some serious numbers. And those numbers are, to a degree, concerning. And again, maybe that's not the case for, like, the leagues necessarily. But once we start seeing some more, like, actual tournaments, like paper events and everything, that opinion might shift a little bit more once we actually see some, like, hard data.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, the restriction of data is not helping us, and I definitely agree that once we have the upcoming pauper championship with GP Vegas, which as of the time most folks hear this will have already happened, once we get those numbers in, I think that's a really great sort of barometer for where the format is at, given that those are events that this one was already as big, if not bigger than some of the largest challenges that we've had. And it's great that we're getting these events now. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can eventually get to that status where this is an actual real format and we get GPs for it and stuff like that. But I know we're still a ways away.
We're definitely got a little ways to go, but I think there's definitely some good signs. When I got taken over for the whole photo op with Star City, the judge for the event was talking to me and mentioned that they were feeling like, hey, these numbers are pretty good, and they may look at this and consider, wanting to actually do this more in the future. And that obviously goes for Star City. Can't say, I don't know about Channel Fireball with the GPs or anything, but that's obviously a factor. And then also over the weekend, I basically got to meet Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast. He was at the event, and turned out that he actually had a very big interest in the format and was really interested to see how the top 8 played out. And actually, I don't think he stayed for all of it, but he definitely hung around when the hall was completely emptying out and watched like a very good chunk of that top 8. So I think that that bodes really well to have someone, so well known and versed, at WotC, who is a fan of the format.
Yeah, that's really exciting. It's always great to know that they do care about us. They do care about the little folks out there who are just content slinging commons. So I'm really excited for the future of pauper, even if, perhaps the metagame has been a little all over the place in the past year. I think we've gotten to the point where we're starting to stabilize a little bit again, and it's nice to see that despite those swings, the pendulum always kind of swings back to a similar point as to where it was before. I guess we're pulling up at just around an hour or so. Do you have any sort of last things you'd like to talk about while we've got you here, or any shilling of yourself? We always welcome that, of course, from guests, but any last kind of things you'd like to touch on?
Not really too much. Obviously, I just started a new job this past week, and actually yesterday was my first day, and that's causing a huge shift in my day-to-day schedule between sleeping and everything else. So everything that I have kind of going on right now is kind of in flux a little bit. So I ended up taking a brief hiatus from streaming just so I could kind of get everything in order a little bit. But I should definitely be back starting next week. I will probably be doing it on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I just don't know. And it's going to be, I still have to actually look at the numbers and, set up which day is going to be which. But basically, one day is going to be modern, one is going to be standard, and one is going to be obviously pauper. I will try and continue doing my streams for the challenges on Sundays, but I can't make any promises. It's just those 3 days I'm going to try and guarantee streams moving forward.
All right, wonderful. Definitely fans who have not somehow checked out Kendra's content, please go. It's good. I promise you. Like, we're just here, two clowns with a microphone a piece, I guess. But like, go check out her stream. It is really quality stuff, and you'll have a good time. I guess, Adrian, would you want to take us out of the show here?
Yeah, and I also want to say, Mike, maybe put the link to Kendra's Twitch in the show description today. But everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. Especially thank you to the Maverick gal, Kendra, for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by the support.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Our pleasure, really, truly. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons, especially Fabled. Consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us, and Kendra as well. We'd like to remind you, for listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, feel free to contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pat's Games, Mike's LGS JP Comics, and L. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. So next week, this is Adrian, Mike, and Kendra, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.